I'm Allison Jonjak, the Cranberry Outreach Specialist with the University of Wisconsin-Madison Division of Extension. These videos are the on-demand recordings of UW Extension and the Wisconsin State Cranberry Growers Association's virtual brown bag lunch series. These monthly sessions offer growers and researchers a way to share timely and relevant information. We hope you'll enjoy and continue to engage with us.
Hi, everyone. My name is Grant Holly. I'm the Executive Director of the Wisconsin State Cranberry Growers Association. We are very happy to be able to partner with UW Extension to bring you the research needed to be able to navigate our ever-changing environment. I'd like to thank all of our speakers today for their valuable time and leadership, the growers for joining us, and Allison for being the catalyst from which all of these sessions rely. Thank you so much.
All right, we have just rolled over to 12 o'clock, so I want to welcome everyone to the June 20th of 2025 Cranberry Brown Bag. We're focusing on having fewer speakers and a little more in depth. So field updates from the entomology, field updates in general from Dave Jones, and field updates in the weed world from Jed Colquhoun. I'm going to do a quick housekeeping, a quick welcome. I believe Anne is here from the Growers Association. So these are hosted jointly by the University of Wisconsin-Madison Division of Extension Cranberry Outreach Program, as well as the Wisconsin State Cranberry Growers Association. We are grateful for everyone being willing to share their expertise here today and help foster conversation among all the growers. We are going to have closed captions on. If you would like to see closed captions, you should be able to choose them from that ... and say view closed captions. And there will be lots of opportunities to ask questions. So if you have a question, you can either unmute yourself and ask a question directly. You can chat the question to the whole room. If you want to ask a question anonymously, you can also use the drop down and say to Allison Jonjak, and I'll ask your question on behalf of you for everyone else anonymously. And I think with that, I will do a quick review of our agenda for today. We're going to open up with Dave Jones, the senior ag scientist with Ocean Spray, is going to give us an overview of what he's seen in the field, protoventuria leaf spot, also a review of everything that he's seen in the field and with his scouting team so far this year. And then Jed Colquhoun is going to bring us into the 1 o'clock with everything that he's seen, especially in the quinstar and quinclorac world, as well as his underway horticulture field trials for this year. Either Grant or Anne, if one of you guys want to unmute yourself and give a quick welcome from the Growers Association, and then we'll hand things over to to Dave.
I guess I'll just speak on behalf of Growers Association. Welcome, and thanks, Allison, so much for putting this all together. You do such an amazing job.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Anne. Glad to get to partner with you on them. So thank you for your help. And then Dave, I will click forward here and have you share your slides and give us all an update from the field.
All right.
Beautiful.
How about now?
Yep,
got it?
Golden. You're golden. Thank you.
All righty. Fantastic. Sorry about that, everybody. Well, good afternoon. Hope everyone's season is going well so far. Thanks so much, as always, Allison, for the invitation to speak. I am going to just get right into the topics for today out of an interest of time, making sure we keep you on schedule and get everyone back to the field as quickly as possible. So I did, as Allison mentioned, we will be going through protoventuria leaf spot real quick here this morning, or this afternoon, I should say. We'll talk about a few highlights from the field thus far. I am going to give a quick summary of the 2025 insecticide screening program, specifically just go through some of the projects that we're doing this year. And then we will finish with a reminder, very brief reminder about a new bloom calculation resource that we have access to through the CI. All right, so starting out with protoventuria leaf spot. So Talking around with growers, talking to consultants, talking to Pam, we're all seeing kind of the same thing this year, which is that there is a fair amount of protoventuria this year, depending on the location. Now, important to emphasize, some sites don't have much, some sites have quite a bit. It really is a bit of a mixed bag. Predominantly, though, we're seeing it at sites that did not use a fungicide during bloom at any point last year. And that's important for reasons we'll discuss in just a minute here. But the bottom line is it's most common on older varieties because they're not typically sprayed as commonly with fungicide. And we're also seeing it on quite a few beds of modern hybrids that were not treated with fungicide last year as well. One of the debates that we'll talk about today briefly is how worried we actually need to be. Historically, protoventuria has been viewed largely as an incidental disease in Wisconsin. It's not really been implicated as being a major destroyer of economic yield. But in full fairness, it's certainly worth discussion is that there really hasn't been an awful lot of research pertaining to protoventuria over the years. And this is due to a couple of reasons. One of them is just, like I mentioned, the fairly widespread perception that historically it hasn't been generally associated with huge losses in yield. But the other reason it hasn't been super widely studied or heavily studied in Wisconsin is because it's very, very incidental. You can have this disease real bad in a bed, and then you can go 4 or 5 years and not see it again. The weather conditions, and specifically the weather conditions contributing to infection, are not super well understood for this disease. We have a general sense of when it is likely sporulating and infecting, but we don't actually have a great handle on the environmental triggers that would lead to this disease being a problem. So, discussing some important notes, if you do choose to spray this year, for growers that have extensive amounts of protoventuria and they want to do something about it, the timing for management, so far as we understand, is a bloom time fungicide application program. Now, the reason that we have learned this is likely the case over the years is mostly because we do not tend to find protoventuria leaf spot in beds that were sprayed during bloom the previous year. So, although I can't show you specific protoventuria data spray trials from Leslie's program or from Patty's program before that, what we've consistently seen over the last, quite a long time, really many years, is that we don't typically find this disease when bloom time fungicides are used. So if you were to choose to spray for this disease, the play here would be to more or less do what you would normally do for a cranberry fruit rot management program in Wisconsin. And that would mean some combination of Proline, Indar and Abound, or Quadristop. If you pick one of these products and spray at one time, you'd be shooting for right around 40 to 50% progress through bloom. If you were to pick two applications as your play, you would go at around 20 to 30% progress through bloom, and then again at around 70 to 80% progress through bloom. Now, I want to emphasize, this is not me endorsing that you do this. There's still a lot that we don't fully understand about protoventuria, and particularly light to moderate cases in the past, we haven't tended to associate with severe damage. This is really just a description for folks that want to do something about what they're seeing out there this year. And it's particularly convenient if you're already a grower that tends to want to spray for cranberry fruit rot. Your normal fruit rot management program will typically take care of leaf spot diseases as well. I also want to emphasize, and this has been a topic that's come up a lot, and growers have been asking about it, you're not saving the leaves with lesions that you're currently seeing. Those are last year's leaves. We don't see protoventuria on this year's leaves at this time of year. Those leaves are just unfolding and expanding now. That's actually what you're protecting. You're protecting this year's unfolding, expanding leaves from spores that are being produced on mature lesions from last year's leaves, right? So unfortunately, there is no fungicide available to us or really any other industry for that matter that's capable of going into a leaf and eliminating a lesion like that. That lesion is there. It's going to be there on last year's leaves, and eventually those leaves will fall off and will be present there on the floor of the bed for a while. This is an investment in next year's leaves, protecting them. I want to emphasize as well that prior to this week, and we're just starting to enter bloom in central Wisconsin here, we still hadn't seen any sporulation yet in our test sites. So this really backs up the idea that protoventuria is probably not a particular risk worth spraying for prior to the bloom window, as we really hadn't seen any evidence of mature lesions or sporulation yet. I did want to emphasize as well that we have been able to throw together a pretty good scale project in this year at a couple of the sites where we are seeing severe infestations across several varieties, where we were actually able to flag in 6 different varieties, 50 individual uprights that were severely infested with protoventuria, and 50 individual uprights that were not severely infested with protoventuria. And we'll be able to go back to all 600 of those uprights at harvest and determine fruit number and fruit weight, hopefully to generate a little bit more data on whether severe infestation on last year's leaves truly is something to worry about, or if in reality protoventuria is more of an aesthetic disease with minimal impact on yield. All right, I'm going to flip over to some general other field observations here, and I want to keep in mind there's plenty more to talk about, but for the purpose of time, I really just picked a couple of the major highlights. The big one to talk about from the early going this season is pre-bloom insect activity, and I have written here, or lack thereof. It has been a remarkably low year for insect pressure in general across the state. At least in our trap line, in our network, we haven't seen pressure this low since the program started in the late 80s. We actually, about a third of the program, or excuse me, about a third of the marshes in the Ocean Spray IPM network didn't end up spraying anything before bloom. We're seeing more or less similar trends at those sites and activity right now compared to those that did. Obviously, one of the big questions that is coming in from growers is why? Why are we seeing such low numbers right now? We've kind of been trending downward on pre-bloom lepidopterous pests over the last 3 years, but this year has certainly been the most striking. Certainly fanfare by Fenton getting a lot of well-deserved credit for being a very good product, but I do believe it's more complex than just the introduction of fanfare, and I'm going to provide a couple of points just for your consideration on that subject. The first point to make on this one is that we can't even find pre-bloom lepidopterous pests in a lot of our wild cranberry sites. And there are several growers that do their own IPM that also check wild stands of cranberries throughout the season. And we're kind of hearing the same thing from them. So it's not just cultivated cranberries where we're seeing low pre-bloom pressure. We're actually seeing quite a few of our wild check sites more or less experiencing a similar suppressed trend or depressive trend on pre-bloom insect activity. An additional point to be made here is that there are several marshes in the network that still haven't used fanfare, and they're experiencing the exact same trend as those that have used it for the last 2 to 3 years, specifically pre-bloom lepidopterous pests. I do want to emphasize this is different from the discussion of tipworm. Tipworm is absolutely becoming hard to find right now because of fanfare at marshes that are using it. I'm really mostly focused right now on these caterpillar pests, things like Sparganothus, fireworm, cutworm, spanworm, etc. The final point for consideration here is that other regions have used fanfare for several years also. So that includes Massachusetts, Washington, and Oregon, and they report normal, even high pre-bloom lepidopterous insect pest activity. So it's certainly possible that we are getting extra mileage out of it due to our boom applications and good timing due to integrated pest management data. But I think all of these factors taken together suggest that although fanfare absolutely deserves a tip of our hats for being an amazing product that we're very lucky to have, it's probably not the only reason that we're seeing such low activity right now. Certainly nobody's complaining about that, myself included. We did start to see cranberry fruitworm flying this year. Actually had a pretty good week 1 catch for our trap network. A lot of marshes already in the 20s and 30s. So I would say early indication is that fruitworm seems to be flying in relatively normal numbers so far. But we'll have to see. One thing's for sure, though, it was certainly a banner year for low insect pressure, and quite a few marshes ended up not having to spray for their pre-bloom. Okay, another big ticket item I wanted to talk about here briefly today is the side shooting. Certainly, this is a big topic of discussion across the state right now. Not everybody has this, but there are quite a few sites across the state that have a pretty substantial amount of vegetative side shooting this year. Overall, there's a little bit of pattern here or there, but by and large, what we're seeing is not particularly limited to any one region, variety, or management program. By management program, I mean philosophy on spring frost protection or flooding. We're seeing this in all of our major regions here and there. In general, it's a pretty widespread thing, and we haven't really been able to isolate it to a single, simple smoking gun. Obviously, everyone is asking about why this is happening. While I would love to provide a very quick and easy answer, I don't really think one exists thus far. It hasn't really been a single unifying factor to blame. Most of the folks on this call are aware, but typically speaking, we associate vegetative side shooting when the terminal bud is either stunted or outright killed by environmental stressors. And basically what happens is when that terminal bud is lost, it gets killed. That axillary, a vegetative bud from an axillary position, meaning adjacent or right above a leaf, basically takes over for the killed terminal bud and starts growing. Unfortunately, these axillary vegetative buds are not capable of carrying flowers and fruit in the current season. So you end up with a flush of green side shoots that are not carrying flowers or fruit when this occurs. Some of the things that people have thrown out as possible causes, and again, this is not my personal endorsement of a cause, but rather things that have been discussed so far, including drought last fall, big crop resulting in nutrient deficit and stressed out vines going into the winter, big crop plus the early winter drought. Did we miss something during frost watch or winter cold protection, perhaps deep ice into the ground hurting vines, or other causes? We're going to continue to try to gather larger trends at the affected sites, but at this time, it's a situation that everyone is kind of monitoring, and we'll just have to see what the effect in the crop is going forward. All right, Jed's going to spend a substantial amount of time talking about this, so I don't want to dwell on this too much, but I did want to share some perspective from the field so far on this product's usage this year. And some general things that we've been seeing so far, both hearing from others as well as kind of what we're seeing so far. Obviously, we know that usage of this product this year was pretty much unprecedented in its scale in our cranberry industry. This product hasn't been super widely used in the past, and boy, was it ever used a lot this year. We have seen it used across a wide range of timings, ranging from early May all the way to just this past week on hooks. And the targeted weeds were incredibly diverse. We saw a wide range of bed ages, ranging from older established plantings to brand new plantings being sprayed with this stuff. Starting with some as potential not so good points, and I'm sure Jed's going to cover this a little bit more. While most of the apps appear to have achieved the targeted control, there are certainly a few that did not. We certainly have seen some gaps in control, and these range from an entire marsh not satisfied with the knockdown that they got to even single marshes where individual beds in the same marsh didn't show the same control of weeds compared to others treated at approximately the same time. So certainly among the success stories, a few head scratchers as well. Just a few of the weeds that slipped through the cracks, and I'm guessing Jed's going to cover this as well. We have seen some of the perennial overring root balls with St. John's wort slip through. We've certainly seen some yellow loosestrife that's managed to slip through. Some lotus species. That's not the full list, but it's a couple of good examples where we have seen it not take quite what we thought it would. There's a lot of possible variables in control that growers have kicked around so far, including agitation of the product, surfactant selection, the growth stage of the weeds themselves, as well as the weather. But I think one thing that was very clear during May, certainly to me, as well as others that I talked to, is that some of the apps made during cold weather took a lot longer to take hold compared to apps made during the warm weather. We saw a serious slowdown, if not outright reduction in efficacy with some of the applications made during that cold, slow start that we had. So it did certainly appear that the cooler weather that we had slowed and potentially impacted some of these applications. The positive spin, though, is that we really haven't seen much in the way of phytotoxicity or vine damage from applications. Now, Jed may have seen differently. He gets a lot of these questions and comments as well, but for the most part, I would say general observation is that the product continues to look very safe for a wide range of beds based on what we're seeing in our network so far. And we did see pretty good control of most of the weeds that were targeted, including the weeds that are listed here. In general, we saw pretty good control with the yellow loosestrife that we saw applications going down in later May and early June, with a couple of exceptions. And particularly where I would say this product has shown a lot is in new plantings. Several of the weeds that really give us a lot of problems on fresh plantings seem to be quite susceptible to this stuff, and has really done a good job for a lot of growers in this capacity. I'll leave it there. I know Jed's going to go further, but that's kind of a quick spin through what we've seen on our end with this product in the early going this year. Alrighty, so flipping over to insecticide trials in 2025, I want to spend a little bit of time here talking about a rundown on this effort. As a reminder, we're currently running this program essentially in an interim while the University of Wisconsin identifies our next fruit entomologist. But for the moment, we are handling it on our end. Certainly special thanks to the Wisconsin Cranberry Board, as always, for the funding to get this work done for all of you each year. So in general, our focus this year is kind of a three-pronged mentality. Firstly, this year we have a heavy focus on vetting economically relevant alternatives to fanfare. One of the most common comments that we get right now is obviously prices are not where a lot of growers would like them to be, and the mentality for control needs to be on the economics. What are the economic ways that we can get good control and not break the bank? So we do have a particular emphasis this year on testing pre-bloom alternatives to fanfare that are on the cheaper end of the spectrum for growers. We also have a continued focus on cranberry flea beetle. Obviously, last year was not a banner year for this pest, but the year prior was a horrendously bad year for the pest. It's hard to say what each year will bring, but for those growers that do have problems with this pest, we certainly see you, we hear you. We continue to prioritize this, particularly as it pertains to more permanent solutions for the pest, as well as identifying any products that could potentially be used in August for this purpose. And finally, prioritizing Altacor reduction strategies. So Altacor is an amazing product for us. It's been on the market for us now for over 10 years, and we rely on it heavily for fruitworm and sparganothus control during that bloom and early post-bloom window. But it's no surprise to anybody that it hasn't really been rotated all that effectively over the last several years just because it is so good. A lot of growers have been using 2 Altacor applications every year now for several years. So we're not necessarily focused on solely programs that eliminate Altacor. A lot of the treatments that we're trialing this year involve a single application of Altacor and then pivoting to a less bee-safe alternative for that second application after the bees leave, though we do have a couple of non-Altacor treatments in our trials as well. So the project list is 6 bullets long. I'll go through them here briefly. So the first item, we have our fruitworm and sparg insecticide trial, and this is where the Altacor reduction focus kind of kicks in. This is in both central and northern Wisconsin, so it's replicated at 2 locations with good pressure. The second project worth mentioning is the multi-year control trial for capsinum. So for those of you that have followed us the last several years, this is that commercially available nematode species that knocks down flea beetle for at least 1 to 2 years after application. We've seen good evidence that it could be at least 2 years, fairly consistent, but we're going to try to push the envelope and see if we can even get it up to 3 years of control this coming year, as well as evaluate last year's treatment sites to see if we consistently see that second year of knockdown with just 1 single year of applications. As always, we continue to have a heavy focus on lab insecticide work, so we continue to do pre-bloom lepidopteras tests, including spanworm and black-headed fireworm, are 2 primary focal points this year, partially because we really didn't have any sparg to test. Cutworm was also fairly limited, but we were able to get good spanworm and some black-headed fireworm data as well. We also have lab insecticide trials targeted at cranberry flea beetle kicking off in August. This is typically an annual endeavor where we're able to work our way through any possible options that we'd like to take a closer look at for field work there in the lab in the month of August. We also did a trial this year looking at whether we could apply the capsinum, so that commercial nematode product targeted at flea beetle, through a T40 spray drone at a couple of standard settings. So we were checking to see if the nematodes would survive the trip through at a couple of different droplet sizes and settings, as well as whether they were still virulent after making that trip through, mostly just to open up another avenue for possible applications, as one of the big critiques of the nematode strategy is that it involves a couple extra trips around the marsh with the boom during a very busy time of year. And finally, we're looking at the retention capacity. So basically, to what degree treated soils that we do treat for the cranberry flea beetle using this product, how many of those original individuals are actually being retained in multiple seasons after that first application goes down. This is really important from an economic standpoint, because if you're going to spend the money to get control of the cranberry flea beetle, you're going to want to make sure that you don't have to spend any more money than you have to on nematodes in the 2 to 3 years or more after that initial application goes down. So the idea here being, if we're able to find that the nematodes that you used are surviving at relatively high rates in the soil over 2 or 3 year spans, rather than having to go back in every 2, 3, 4 years with the max labeled rate, which is relatively high, you could theoretically just top off the soil with another round of nematodes every couple of years, almost like a standing rotation, in order to maintain the nematode population at an adequate level. This last product is a collaboration that we're doing with Dr. Peter DiGennaro, our nematologist at the University of Wisconsin Department of Plant Pathology. We collected all the samples, and Peter's lab is primarily running the species diversity on all of the soils that we're looking at to see if we are in fact seeing some retention of that population for a couple of years. All right. The last slide I have here is a quick reminder. We have not, I don't think it's posted yet, or probably maybe even by the end of the day today, but we do have a new unified bloom calculation document available on the Cranberry Institute website. For those of you that attended the spring mini clinic, Leslie gave an awesome chat about a little bit of our conversation over the last year on trying to unify some of the language that we use to talk about progress through bloom versus the in-bloom calculation, discussion of out-of-bloom calculation, basically with the intent of all using the same terms to talk about the same calculation. We were able to work across the industry in all major production regions and compile a list of the calculations, and we were also able to unify on standard terminology for all of them this past year, which has been a very nice thing. And it'll be a useful tool for both growers and researchers going forward. So if you are interested in viewing this document or taking a look at the updates, it is available or should be available shortly here on the CI's website. You're certainly welcome to reach out with any questions if you have issues accessing it. All right, that brings me to the end here. I'm certainly happy to answer any questions. I think I might have about 5 minutes if people have anything they'd like to ask. But none of the work that we do would be possible without our own team, as well as special thanks to Pam. Pam and I really appreciate Pam's communication throughout the season, and Pam's been helping us get the insects that we need to run our screening program this year too. So cannot thank her enough for that assistance, as well as cooperating growers and the Cranberry Board. I will open it up for questions.
Thank you for all of that, Dave. Wonderful updates so far, and we do have about 4 minutes for questions built in here. If people have questions they would like to offer up, whether by unmuting yourself and asking directly, typing into the chat for everyone, or using the drop down to send the chat to me and I can ask it anonymously. I think if we are waiting for other questions to come in, Dave, in case there are people who are called in on the call rather than seeing your slides, did you want to call out what you saw as the major weeds that Quinstar was effective against? Just because I think you had it on a slide and said these weeds. It might be good to say them out verbally in case people are on the phone.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I'll probably leave most of that discussion to Jed, but sure. I will say in general terms, a couple of the weeds that the majority of the application seems to hit pretty hard. Good example would be clover, a lot of different species of clover, though there were a couple exceptions. And I want to emphasize everything I'm about to say, there's probably at least one exception because we did see some variability this year. In general, though, clover seemed to go pretty well. You look at a couple of your crabgrass species that we find in a lot of our new plantings, seemed to hit those very hard. Seedlings of the St. John's wort. So this year's seed trying to germinate seems to do a very good job on those. Those are all good examples of weeds that I would say in general, the product seems to do a pretty good job on.
We have another minute for other questions to come in, but otherwise, Jed, if you want to start queuing up your slides, and I'll just let us transition directly from Dave's to Jed's to avoid
Sure, I can do that.
Sure. And Dave, thank you, and else to everyone that Dave has worked with to help get that information. We're grateful to all of you and grateful for sharing it. So I guess with that, if you continue to have questions, go ahead and drop those in the chat.